The tools you bought to survive were never designed to save you. But the tools that could? Those were buried. And that is the fracture line between people who think they're prepared and people who actually are. Modern preparedness didn't teach you how to survive a collapse. It taught you how to buy things that work as long as the world works with them. The entire industry is engineered around the same principle. Sell you confidence, not capability. Sell you replacements, not resilience. Sell you tools that function beautifully inside a system that no longer exists the moment you need them. What most people call preparedness is really dependence wearing camouflage. They invest in devices that promise security, but rely on fragile supply chains, limited lifespans, and technologies that degrade in silence. They think buying gear makes them ready. But the collapse reveals a truth civilization hides well. You were never meant to become self-sustaining. You were meant to stay a customer. And yet, before survival became a marketplace, there existed tools designed with a different philosophy. Tools built to outlive failure rather than avoid it. Tools that didn't require fuel, replacement parts, infrastructure, or permission. Tools that turned a single human into a self-sufficient operating system. These tools weren't forgotten by accident. They were pushed into obscurity because they break the economic model that keeps people dependent, predictable, and profitable. You don't need more gear. You need the capability the old world quietly buried. And to understand why these 7 tools matter, and why they were suppressed, you must first understand how the world actually operates. The moment collapse removes the illusion of stability. A collapse doesn't create new rules. It exposes the rules that were always there. Rules the modern world insulated you from so effectively that you forgot they existed. When the grid dies, society doesn't rewind to chaos. It rewinds to physics. And physics is merciless to anyone who doesn't understand how it governs survival. If you want to know why the 7 buried tools matter, you must first understand the 5 laws that shape every decision you make once the system disappears. The first is the law of energy. Every action costs energy, and without a renewable source, you are operating on a countdown. Human muscle alone cannot sustain the tasks collapse demands. Any tool that doesn't generate or conserve energy becomes dead weight. The second is the law of heat. The human body is a thermal machine. Lose heat too fast and you die. Lose the ability to shed heat and you die. Shelter is not protection. It is temperature control. Fire is not comfort. It is metabolic survival. The third is the law of water. Dehydration isn't slow in a collapse environment. It accelerates with exertion, stress, and exposure. Water is not something you carry. It's something you must be able to create or extract because no stockpile outlasts real conditions. The fourth is the law of distance. Most danger is avoidable if you can control the space between you and it. Distance determines whether you detect, deter, or collide with threats. This is physics, not tactics. The fifth is the law of continuity. Nothing lasts without maintenance. A tool you cannot repair is a temporary privilege, not a survival asset. The modern world hid these laws behind convenience. The collapse removes that shield. And the 7 buried tools are powerful not because they are exotic, but because each one satisfies one or more of these laws in ways modern gear cannot. They replace entire infrastructures you didn't know you were relying on. Every collapse exposes the same weakness. Modern energy systems are designed to expire long before you do. Lithium batteries decay internally from dendrite growth, even while sitting unused. Lead acid banks suffocate under sulfation until they can no longer hold a charge. Fuel oxidizes into varnish, generators corrode as soon as maintenance stops, and every energy source you relied on in the old world quietly transitions into failure the moment the system that supports it disappears. That is why energy becomes the first major point of breakdown, because all modern power solutions assume resupply, replacement, and infrastructure. The nickel-iron battery exists outside that assumption entirely. The Edison cell is built on a principle the modern world abandoned: durability as the primary design goal. Unlike lithium or lead-acid systems, the nickel-iron chemistry does not consume itself. Its potassium hydroxide electrolyte functions purely as an ion carrier, not a reactant. The nickel and iron plates undergo reversible changes, meaning the internal structure does not degrade in normal use. The result is a battery that tolerates every abuse a collapse will throw at it. You can fully drain it to zero and leave it there for months. You can overcharge it without risking thermal runaway. You can freeze it solid without cracking the case. You can leave it forgotten in a shed for a decade. Flush the electrolyte, refill it, and watch it return to near original performance. Some units built over a century ago still operate today, and that single fact changes the energy landscape after a collapse more than any modern innovation. In practical terms, a nickel-iron power core means your essential systems stop being temporary. Water extraction runs without interruption. Lighting, tools, radios, and sensors remain operational without fear of battery death. Repair equipment and heat generation systems no longer depend on fuel reserves or fragile electronics. The battery becomes the backbone of a permanent microgrid, one that requires no supply chain, no fuel source, and no replacement cycle. Instead of rationing power or fearing depletion, you operate from a position of continuity. Why was this technology buried? Because a battery that lasts 50 to 100 years destroys the economic model of repeat purchases that every modern energy company relies on. Its longevity is not a marketing flaw, it is a financial threat. But in a world where infrastructure collapses and replacement stops existing, that longevity becomes the closest thing to guaranteed power a human can possess. Water is the most unforgiving survival variable because it follows a rule that never bends. You can only lose for 3 days, and the environment almost never gives without taking something back. Streams dry, reservoirs become contaminated. Wells require infrastructure, and stored water, no matter how much, eventually runs out. In every collapse scenario, people don't die from a lack of water. They die from believing water is something you find. The truth is different. Water cannot be found reliably. It must be generated. And that is exactly what an atmospheric water generator does. An AWG pulls moisture from the air, whether that air feels wet or not. Every cubic meter of atmosphere contains water vapor, and the amount rises with temperature. The technology is straightforward. Air is drawn across a cooled surface, vapor condenses into droplets, and the collected water is filtered for consumption. Even low humidity environments contain extractable moisture. More advanced AWG systems use desiccant materials to absorb vapor and release it through heat cycling, meaning they don't depend on high humidity or continuous power. This is why AWGs outperform traditional survival methods. They turn the atmosphere itself into an infinite reservoir. The real advantage appears when infrastructure fails. You no longer rely on rivers, wells, rainfall, or stored supplies. An AWG produces clean drinking water every single day, independent of terrain, season, or mobility. It reduces water from a desperate search into a predictable output. That predictability transforms survival from crisis management into operational routine. With a stable power source like the nickel-iron battery, an AWG becomes a self-sustaining system that runs indefinitely. You wake up with water, not hope. So why is such a capability not mainstream? Because if individuals can produce water anywhere, an entire chain of economic dependencies collapses. Bottled water, home filtration systems, emergency storage kits, chemical treatments, and municipal billing structures. AWGs exist, but rarely enter public conversation because they eliminate recurring purchases. Independence has no place in a marketplace built on replenishment. In a post-collapse world, the individual who controls water controls time, because dehydration accelerates every other failure: cognition, mobility, temperature regulation, and decision-making. With an AWG, you neutralize that pressure completely. Water stops being a countdown and becomes a constant. And in any survival equation, constancy is power. Shelter is often misunderstood as a passive barrier: four walls, a roof, and some insulation. But in a collapse, shelter becomes something far more consequential. It is your thermal buffer, your concealment layer, your defensive geometry, and the physical expression of your ability to control space. The moment manufactured infrastructure disappears, your survival depends not on the shelter you find, but on the shelter you can create. And the most overlooked tool for creating it is a structural shaper based on cold-forming mechanics, essentially a compact system capable of bending, cutting, punching, and shaping scrap materials into functional architecture. Cold forming works because it exploits leverage and material memory rather than heat. Steel, aluminum, and sheet metals scavenged from debris fields, vehicles, broken gates, or abandoned buildings become workable assets when you have a tool that multiplies force through mechanical advantage. A pry bar, mini bender, hole punch, and cutting edge integrated into a single platform allow you to fabricate support braces, wall panels, windbreaks, hinge points, one-way entry frames, improvised armor, or structural reinforcement. Unlike wood, which rots, burns, warps, and absorbs moisture, metal debris in a collapse environment is effectively endless and retains strength regardless of age. The value of this tool becomes obvious once you understand that shelter is not simply protection. Proper structure management determines heat retention, noise signature, visibility, entry vectors, and whether your position can be breached silently. With metal shaping capability, you can isolate a heat source so it doesn't silhouette you at night, redirect airflow to maintain internal temperature, create choke points that force intruders into predictable movement patterns, and reinforce doors so a shoulder strike becomes impossible. You're not just building shelter, you are sculpting environmental control. So why is such a tool rarely mentioned in survival discourse? Because it bypasses the entire retail ecosystem around tents, prefab shelters, disposable tarps, collapsible frames, and high-margin gear designed to fail through wear. A single cold-forming multi-tool allows you to build structures stronger than anything you could purchase and rebuild them indefinitely from free materials. It replaces both the product and the need for more products, which makes it commercially inconvenient to promote. In a post-collapse world, your shelter is not the structure you inhabit. It is the structure you can modify, repair, and redesign under pressure. With a proper structural shaper, you stop being limited by the environment and start rewriting it to your advantage. That transition from occupant to architect is one of the most decisive shifts a survivor can make. Fire is one of the few survival variables that punishes hesitation immediately. Without heat, you lose the ability to regulate your core temperature, sterilize water, cook food, dry clothing, treat wounds, cure materials, signal allies, or deter predators. Yet most people still rely on lighters, matches, and tinder systems that fail the moment humidity, wind, or cold reach real-world levels. The misconception is simple. People treat fire like a skill, when in reality it is an equation. Fuel, ignition, oxygen, and any tool that cannot guarantee ignition under all conditions is unreliable in a collapse. This is why the most effective fire system is built around a ferrocerium rod paired with a high oxygen catalyst mixture. A premium ferro rod produces sparks at temperatures above 3,000 degrees Celsius, far hotter than a magnesium fire starter or standard lighter flame. The key advantage is material independence. Ferro rods throw sparks even when wet, frozen, or contaminated with dirt, and continue to function after thousands of strikes. But the true power comes from pairing it with a catalyst, such as potassium permanganate and glycerin. When the two combine, they create a self-igniting exothermic reaction that produces flame without requiring dry tinder, airflow precision, or finesse. In extreme conditions, saturated ground, freezing temperatures, high winds, this system becomes the difference between maintaining operational capability and slipping into hypothermia. A ferro rod ensures ignition. The catalyst ensures combustion. Together, they circumvent the environmental variables that normally prevent fire creation. Even if every piece of natural tinder is soaked, even if the air is thin and oxygen poor, even if you have no fine motor control due to cold stress, your fire still ignites. So why isn't this system promoted heavily in mainstream survival gear? Because disposable fire starters, stormproof matches, specialized tinder bundles, and branded survival lighters generate continuous revenue. They are consumables by design. A ferro rod with catalytic backup is not. It lasts years, even decades, without needing replacement. It gives individuals the ability to reliably create heat without buying fuel, carrying backup lighters, or relying on consumable products. In a post-collapse environment, heat is not optional. It is the foundation of metabolism, morale, and mission continuity. A permanent ignition system eliminates one of the harshest uncertainties you will face: whether your next fire will start. And when your heat source is guaranteed, every other operation becomes easier, safer, and more predictable. In any collapse scenario, the most dangerous variable is not the environment, it's proximity. Threats only become lethal when they get close enough to act. And in low-light environments, distance collapses faster than your ability to process it. That is why the fifth tool is not a weapon, nor a deterrent in the traditional sense. It is a tactical light system designed to control visibility, orientation, and approach angles, equipped with both white light and infrared modes. In simple terms, it gives you the ability to shape how others perceive you while leaving their perception incomplete. A wide beam flashlight exposes you as much as it illuminates your surroundings. It floods the area, giving away your position, revealing your silhouette, and destroying night adaptation. But a tactical angle light with selective IR output changes the physics of nighttime movement. White light can be directed into a narrow cone, controlling exactly what is visible and what remains concealed. You illuminate what you choose, not yourself. Meanwhile, IR mode allows silent communication and covert navigation when paired with night vision devices, tools increasingly accessible in the civilian market. Other people see darkness. You see the entire terrain. The strategic value is simple. Distance is the first line of defense, and light is how you sculpt that distance. With proper control, you can read a surrounding without broadcasting your location, force intruders into predictable movement paths, disorient anyone attempting to close in, and maintain the reaction time advantage. A sudden directional flash can freeze an approaching threat, disrupt depth perception, and interrupt decision-making. Even without confrontation, you determine when contact happens and at what range. Why is this tool rarely discussed in mainstream survival culture? Because most preparedness advice fixates on equipment that functions after contact: knives, firearms, deterrence. But in the real world, avoiding contact entirely provides a far higher survival probability. Tactical light control is a professional-level technique used by military units and security teams because it shifts the engagement from reactive to preemptive. The public isn't taught this because it requires understanding behavior, not just buying equipment. In a collapse, you win not by overpowering threats, but by preventing them from ever reaching your effective range. With a directional light system and IR capability, you reclaim the single most valuable asset in any hostile environment: the ability to decide when someone sees you and when they don't. Information is the first thing modern people lose when the grid collapses, and paradoxically, it is the one thing they never think to back up. Maps vanish with dead batteries. Skills vanish when memory falters under stress. Plans vanish when phones become inert slabs of glass. What most people overlook is that knowledge degrades faster than equipment, because human memory collapses under exhaustion, cold, dehydration, and panic. That is why the sixth tool is not digital, not dependent on power, and not vulnerable to weather. A durable field notebook paired with an indefinite ink writing system, such as a metal nib pen or carbon-based perpetual pencil. This tool matters because it transforms information into a physical asset, one that cannot crash, cannot be wiped, and cannot be drained by a dead battery. A weatherproof notebook, stone paper, polymer pages, or waterproof fiber stock resists tearing, moisture, temperature shifts, and abrasion. Combined with permanent ink or metal etch writing, it becomes a long-term, off-grid memory system capable of storing mission-critical details: water sources you've discovered, structural layouts of abandoned buildings, safe approach routes, fire-starting formulas, improvised repairs, gear checklists, medical treatments, barter agreements, and evolving threat patterns. In a collapse, this becomes more than record-keeping. It is continuity. When you are injured, when someone else must take over, when your mind clouds from fatigue or cold, the notebook holds the information you can't afford to forget. It becomes your external brain, immune to the limitations of biology. Teams can share knowledge without electronics. Future decisions become more accurate because they're grounded in recorded observations, not fading recollection. Why isn't this emphasized in survival culture? Because modern society pushes you toward digital dependency. Cloud storage, online maps, phone notes, apps, everything encourages you to believe that information is always accessible. A waterproof notebook doesn't generate revenue through subscriptions, upgrades, or replacements. It quietly removes the need for digital infrastructure altogether. Knowledge is a survival multiplier. One correct piece of information at the right moment can prevent loss, avoid conflict, accelerate repairs, or reveal opportunities others overlook. When the world collapses, technology becomes fragile, but written knowledge, permanent, durable, and always available, becomes the one tool that never fails. Survival is rarely lost in a dramatic moment. It is lost quietly when a tool handle cracks, when a water line leaks, when a structural brace bends, when a weapon sight loosens, when a pot develops a hole, or when a critical piece of equipment fails in the middle of a task. Most people don't register these failures as threats because the modern world taught them a reflex that becomes fatal during collapse. Replace it. But a collapse eliminates replacement entirely. The only tools that matter are the ones you can keep alive. This is why the seventh tool is not glamorous, not tactical, and not marketed heavily. A compact field repair kit built around three core components: a microtorch, steel epoxy, and a multi-bit driver. The microtorch is the backbone of field-level restoration. Its high-temperature flame allows you to heat, loosen, bend, shape, and reform metal components that would otherwise be useless. Hinges can be reset, bolts can be freed, structural pieces can be realigned. The ability to manipulate metal at a micro scale means you can maintain tools long after other people's gear has turned into dead weight. Steel epoxy is the second pillar. When mixed, it undergoes a chemical reaction that forms a metal-hard bond capable of sealing cracked containers, patching leaks in cook pots, reinforcing weak points in tools, repairing weapon mounts, or rebuilding broken edges. It cures without requiring specialized equipment and holds under stress, vibration, and weather. In a world without spare parts, it becomes a universal patch that transforms temporary fixes into operational solutions. The multi-bit driver completes the system. Nearly every piece of modern equipment, knives, lanterns, filters, optics, tools, stoves, radios, uses screws as failure points. A single driver with interchangeable bits allows you to open, tighten, replace, adjust, and revive equipment that would otherwise degrade silently. It prevents losing the whole tool because one micro-component failed, which is the most common collapse failure cascade. Why is this kit rarely talked about? Because it prevents repeat purchases. A repaired piece of gear doesn't need to be replaced. A restored tool doesn't contribute to the economy of disposability. Field repair is the enemy of consumer survival culture. In a collapse, longevity becomes strength. And the individual who can repair their tools indefinitely gains something no stockpile can provide: the ability to stay operational long after everyone else has run out of functioning equipment. Survival doesn't belong to the best gear. It belongs to the person who can keep their gear alive. The 7 tools you've seen are not obscure because they failed. They're obscure because they worked too well. They solved problems permanently in a world built on selling temporary solutions. To understand why they were buried, you must look past survival and into the underlying machinery of modern society. An economy driven not by utility, but by dependence. Every major industry profits only when its solutions expire. Anything that lasts too long, repairs too easily, or grants too much independence becomes economically hostile to the system that surrounds it. A nickel-iron battery that survives a century destroys the battery replacement market. An atmospheric water generator eliminates bottled water, filters, purification tablets, and infrastructure ties. A structural shaping tool invalidates entire categories of tents, prefab shelters, and disposable outdoor gear. A permanent ignition system erases lighter sails and emergency fire-starting kits. Tactical distance control tools reduce reliance on reactive defensive gear. Durable analog knowledge storage weakens dependence on cloud services and device ecosystems. And a field repair kit undermines the premise that broken tools must be replaced rather than restored. Each of these technologies suppresses a profitable failure point, so they never reached mainstream adoption, not because they lacked function, but because they lacked recurrence. But economics is only part of the reason. The deeper motive is control. A society remains predictable when its people rely on centralized systems for water, power, information, and security. Remove those dependencies, and the individual becomes difficult to influence, regulate, or contain. Self-sufficient people don't panic. They don't comply out of fear. They don't collapse when infrastructure does. The 7 tools undermine the leverage points institutions use to maintain order: scarcity, convenience, and reliance. The collapse doesn't suddenly make these tools powerful. They were always powerful. The collapse simply reveals what the old world worked hard to hide. Permanence is a threat to profit, and autonomy is a threat to control.